The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the general store in Mineral Point, Wisconsin, and Helena Wright knew this was the moment her entire life would change forever. Whether for better or worse, she could not say. She pressed her gloved hand against the window, watching dust settle around the wooden wheels as her heart hammered against her ribs. 23 years of living had taught her that expectations rarely matched reality, and she suspected this moment would prove no different. The journey from Philadelphia had been long, uncomfortable, and had given her far too much time to imagine what sort of man would answer an advertisement for a mail-order bride. Desperate, probably. Old, possibly. Cruel, she hoped not. But she had little room to judge anyone's desperation when her own circumstances had driven her to answer such an advertisement herself. The driver appeared at the door, opening it with a creak of hinges that needed oiling. He was an older man with kind eyes, and he had been patient with her during the journey, especially when they stopped and she needed extra time to maneuver. "Here we are, miss. Mineral Point. Your intended should be waiting at the hotel according to the letter." Helena nodded, gathering her courage along with her carpet bag. She reached for the side of the coach, preparing herself for the difficult descent. Her right leg, twisted from a childhood illness that had left it shorter and weaker than the left, always made such movements challenging. She had learned to manage, but it required concentration and often drew unwanted attention. As her foot touched the first step down, she heard a voice from below, steady and reassuring. "Easy now. Take your time." She looked down to see a man standing beside the coach, one hand extended upward in offering. He was tall, with broad shoulders that spoke of hard work, and wore the dusty clothes of a working cowboy. Dark hair curled slightly beneath his hat, and when he looked up at her, his eyes were the color of rich earth after rain. He could not have been much older than 30, perhaps younger. "I can manage," she said softly, not wanting to appear helpless before they had even met properly. "I am certain you can," he replied, his hand still extended. "But there is no shame in accepting help when it is freely offered." Something in his tone made her believe he meant it without condescension, so she placed her hand in his. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip gentle but secure. She made her way down the steps, and when she finally stood on solid ground, her limp was immediately apparent as she took a few steps away from the coach. She saw him notice, watched his eyes take in her uneven gait. Her stomach tightened with familiar anxiety. In her letters to James Norton, she had not mentioned her condition. She had meant to, had written the words a dozen times, but each time she had crumpled the paper and started again, leaving that particular truth unspoken. It was dishonest, she knew, but she had been terrified that honesty would leave her with no options at all. "Are you James Norton?" she asked, her chin lifting slightly in a gesture that was half pride, half defense. "I am," he confirmed. "And you must be Helena Wright." "I am." She waited for it, the change in his expression, the disappointment or worse, the disgust. She had seen it before in the eyes of potential suitors back in Philadelphia. Her father's debts had been large enough that even her disadvantage had not immediately disqualified her from the marriage market, but it had certainly limited her prospects considerably. James was quiet for a moment, and she could almost hear her heart breaking in the silence. Then he spoke, his voice gentle. "I'll walk slow beside you always," he said, "if you will have me." Helena felt something catch in her throat. She stared at him, searching his face for signs of pity or false kindness, but found only sincerity. His eyes held hers without wavering, without judgment. "You do not know me," she managed to say, "and I have been dishonest with you. I should have told you in my letters." "You should have felt safe enough to tell me," James replied. That you did not speaks to how the world has treated you, I think, not to your character." He gestured toward the hotel down the street. "I have taken rooms for us, separate rooms, of course. I thought you might want some time to rest after your journey and we could talk properly tomorrow. I do not want you to feel rushed into anything. You have traveled a long way based on letters alone. You should have time to be certain." She had expected many things, but not this quiet consideration. "You would delay the wedding." "I would delay it forever if you found you could not bear the thought of marrying me," James said simply. "I will not hold you to an agreement made through letters if the reality does not suit you. I am not a wealthy man, Miss Wright. I am a cowboy, working on a ranch outside of town. I have saved enough to start building my own place, but it is rough work and a hard life. If you choose to return to Philadelphia, I will pay for your passage." The driver had unloaded her trunk and was now watching this exchange with barely concealed interest. Helena realized they were creating quite a spectacle standing in the street. She glanced around and saw several townspeople had paused in their activities to observe the newcomer. "I have no life to return to in Philadelphia," she said quietly. "My father passed 6 months ago, leaving nothing but debts. I have no family, no prospects. I came here because it was my only option." She forced herself to meet his eyes again. "But I will not trap you in a marriage you do not want. You did not agree to this." She gestured toward her leg. "I agreed to marry Helena Wright," James said firmly. "As far as I can tell, that is who you are." Before she could respond, a woman's voice called out from across the street. "James Norton, are you going to keep that poor girl standing in the dust all afternoon, or are you going to show her some proper hospitality?" Helena turned to see a pleasantly plump woman in her 50s approaching, wiping her hands on her apron. She had a kind face and shrewd eyes that took in the situation quickly. "Mrs. Foster," James greeted her with evident relief. "I was just about to escort Miss Wright to the hotel." "The hotel," Mrs. Foster said with a sniff. "I think not. I have a perfectly good spare room and Miss Wright will stay with me until you two figure out what you are doing." She looked at Helena with a warm smile. "I am Margaret Foster. I run the boarding house, and I will not have any young woman feeling she has nowhere proper to turn in this town. You come with me, dear, and we will get you settled." Helena glanced at James uncertainly, but he nodded with what looked like relief. "Mrs. Foster is one of the most respectable women in Mineral Point," he assured her. "You will be well cared for." "But I cannot impose," Helena began. "Nonsense," Mrs. Foster said briskly. "James, you bring her trunk along. Come, dear, you look exhausted. When did you last have a decent meal?" Before Helena quite knew what was happening, she found herself being ushered down the street toward a large, well-maintained house, with a sign reading Foster's boarding house. James followed with her trunk on his shoulder, and she could hear the driver chuckling as he climbed back onto the stagecoach. Mrs. Foster kept up a steady stream of conversation that required little response, for which Helena was grateful. Her mind was reeling from the encounter with James. His reaction had been so far from what she had expected that she hardly knew what to think. She had braced herself for rejection, for anger at her deception, perhaps for a coldly practical acceptance. She had not expected kindness, and she certainly had not expected his words. "I'll walk slow beside you always." The boarding house was clean and comfortable, with lace curtains in the windows and the smell of something delicious baking in the kitchen. Mrs. Foster led her upstairs to a sunny room with a brass bed and a washstand. "Here we are. The necessary is at the end of the hall. I will bring up some hot water so you can wash, and then you will come down and have some supper. James, you can leave the trunk there and come back tomorrow at a reasonable hour to call on Miss Wright properly." James set the trunk down carefully, He looked at Helena, his hat now in his hands. "May I call on you tomorrow afternoon?" "Yes," Helena heard herself say. "I would like that." He smiled then, a slow, genuine smile that transformed his face from handsome to something that made her heart skip. "I am glad you are here, Miss Wright. I hope you will come to feel the same about being in Mineral Point." After he left, Mrs. Foster returned with a pitcher of hot water and a knowing look. "James Norton is a good man," she said without preamble. "His family has been in Wisconsin for 2 generations. His father died 5 years back, and his mother followed a year later. He works harder than any 3 men combined, and he is honest to a fault. If he says he will do something, he does it." "You are recommending him to me," Helena said, understanding. "I am telling you what I know," Mrs. Foster corrected gently. "I am also telling you that you have time to decide, and a safe place to stay while you do. Now, wash up and come down to supper. You need feeding, and I need someone to talk to besides boarders who only grunt over their newspapers." That evening, Helena sat at Mrs. Foster's table and ate roast chicken with potatoes and carrots, the best meal she had eaten in months. The older woman told her about Mineral Point, about the lead mining that had given the town its name, about how the mines were largely played out now, but the town had survived by adapting, by farming and raising cattle. She spoke of the harsh winters and the beautiful springs, of the mix of Cornish, German, and American settlers who had built the town. "James works for the Triple Creek Ranch, about 5 miles west of town," Mrs. Foster said. "He has been saving his pay for years now. He purchased land of his own last year, good grazing land with a creek running through it. He has been building a cabin there, bit by bit, working on it during his time off. That is why he placed the advertisement, I suppose. A man building a home wants a family to put in it." Helena absorbed this information, trying to imagine this life so different from everything she had known in Philadelphia. She thought about the cramped boarding house where she had lived after her father's death, working as a seamstress for barely enough to pay her rent. She thought about the pitying looks, the whispered conversations that stopped when she entered a room. "He did not seem disturbed," she said quietly. "By my leg." Mrs. Foster reached across the table and patted her hand. "James Norton judges people by their character, not their circumstances. His mother walked with a cane the last years of her life, arthritis in her hip. He helped her every day without complaint, treated her with respect and tenderness. That is the kind of man he is." That night, lying in the comfortable bed in the quiet room, Helena allowed herself something she had not permitted in a long time: hope. It felt dangerous, fragile as spun glass, but it was there nonetheless. She woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through the windows and the sound of voices from downstairs. After dressing carefully in her best day dress, a modest blue cotton that brought out her eyes, she made her way downstairs, concentrating on each step. Her leg always was stiffest in the mornings. Mrs. Foster was serving breakfast to several boarders, men who worked in town at various trades. They were polite, tipping their heads to her respectfully before returning to their meals. She ate eggs and fresh bread with butter, luxuries she had not been able to afford regularly in Philadelphia. "James will likely come by after lunch," Mrs. Foster said. "He would have to ride in from the ranch. In the meantime, would you like to see the town? I need to do some shopping." Helena agreed, partly out of genuine curiosity, and partly because she knew she could not simply sit and wait nervously for James's arrival. They walked slowly through Mineral Point, with Mrs. Foster adjusting her pace without comment or fuss. The town was smaller than Philadelphia, but had a solid, prosperous feel. The buildings were well maintained, the streets busy with people going about their business. At the general store, Mrs. Foster introduced her to the proprietor, Mr. Chen, a Chinese immigrant who had come to work on the railroads and stayed to open a business. He was courteous and soft-spoken, and his store was remarkably well-stocked. "Miss Wright is James Norton's intended, Mrs. Foster announced, and Helena saw Mr. Chen's face brighten. "Ah, James is good man. Good customer, always pays promptly. You are very fortunate," he said to Helena with a slight bow. "I am beginning to think I might be," Helena replied honestly. They encountered more townspeople as they walked, and Mrs. Foster introduced her to each one. Helena was surprised by the warmth of their reception. In Philadelphia, her father's debts and her own disability had made her something of a pariah in their social circle. Here, people seemed to take her at face value, judging her interaction by interaction rather than by her past or her limp. When they returned to the boarding house just after noon, Helena helped Mrs. Foster prepare lunch, grateful for something to do with her hands. She was drying dishes when there was a knock at the door. Her heart jumped into her throat. Mrs. Foster smiled and untied her apron. "That will be James. Go on into the parlor, dear. I will send him in and give you some privacy, but I will be right in the next room, so everything is proper." Helena smoothed her dress and walked into the parlor, a comfortable room with worn but clean furniture and windows overlooking the street. Moments later, James entered, hat in hand once again. He had cleaned up, she noticed, his hair still damp from washing, his shirt fresh though she could see it had been carefully mended in one place. "Miss Wright," he greeted her. "Thank you for seeing me." "Please call me Helena," she said. "If we are to consider marriage, such formality seems unnecessary." "Helena, then, and you should call me James." He remained standing until she sat, then took the chair across from her rather than beside her on the sofa, maintaining a respectful distance. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. In the clear light of day, Helena could see him better than she had the previous evening. He had a strong, honest face, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often. His hands rested on his knees, broad and capable, marked with small scars that spoke of hard work. "I want to be honest with you," James said finally. "I am 31 years old. I have been working as a cowboy since I was 16. I am good at my work, but it does not pay much. I have been saving for years to buy my own land and build a home. I did that because I want a family, a life of my own, but I have never been good with words, never been the type to court a girl properly. When my friend suggested placing an advertisement, it seemed like it might be the only way." "Why did you not marry someone from here?" Helena asked. "Surely there are unmarried women in Mineral Point." "There are," James acknowledged, "but they have known me since I was a boy. They have expectations, want someone who will stay in town, someone with more prospects than a cowboy can offer. I wanted someone who might see the life I can provide as better than what she had, not worse. I wanted a partner who understood what it meant to work for something." Helena considered this. "You wanted someone desperate enough not to be particular." He met her eyes steadily. "I wanted someone brave enough to take a chance. There is a difference." She found herself believing him. "Why did your advertisement appeal to me? Because you were honest in it. You did not promise wealth or luxury. You described a simple life, hard work, but you wrote about the land with such love, such hope for the future. It made me think you were someone who valued real things, not social standing or appearances." "Yet you feared I would reject you for your leg," James said gently. Helena felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I have been rejected before. Men who might have overlooked my father's debts found my disability too high a price. I am slower than most. I cannot dance. I cannot run. There are many things I cannot do." "Can you keep a house?" James asked. "Yes." "Can you cook?" "I am adequate at it. I can learn to do better. Can you tend a garden, mend clothes, help with the work of running a home and eventually a ranch? Yes, Helena said firmly. I can do all those things. I worked hard in Philadelphia. I may need to sit down more often than others. I may need longer to walk places, but I do not shirk my responsibilities. James leaned forward slightly. Then you can do everything I need a wife to do. The rest is just details. He paused. I should tell you what you would be agreeing to if you marry me. I have a cabin on my land, but it is still being built. Right now, it is just 3 rooms. A main room, a bedroom, and a small loft. I will add more as I can. I still work for the Triple Creek Ranch because I need the income, but I have my own herd started, about 20 head of cattle. In time, I hope to work my own land full-time. It will be hard the first few years, maybe longer. There will not be much money for luxuries. But the land is good, Helena. The cabin sits on a rise overlooking the creek, and in the spring, wildflowers cover the meadow. I think it is the most beautiful place in Wisconsin. The way he spoke of his land, with such pride and affection, touched something in Helena's heart. This was a man who had worked for his dreams, who had built something with his own hands. I need to know, she said carefully, that this is not charity on your part. I do not want to be someone's burden, someone you feel obligated to care for out of pity. James's expression turned serious. I will not lie and say I do not feel protective of you, but that is not the same as pity. I wrote that advertisement because I wanted a wife, a partner, someone to build a life with. I hoped for someone kind, someone hardworking, someone who would value what I had to offer. Your letters showed me all of that. You wrote about your work as a seamstress, about the satisfaction of creating something beautiful and useful. You wrote about your love of reading, about missing your mother who passed when you were young. You showed me who you are, Helena. A limp does not change any of that. But you could have married someone without such a disadvantage, Helena persisted, needing to understand. James was quiet for a moment, seeming to gather his thoughts. My mother used to say that life gives everyone their burdens to carry. Some just show more than others. She said the measure of a person was not what they carried, but how they carried it. You traveled halfway across the country alone to meet a stranger because you were brave enough to seek a better life. That tells me more about your character than any physical consideration. Helena felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back. You have a kind way of looking at things. I have a practical way of looking at things, James corrected gently. I need a wife. You need a home and a husband. We both knew that when we began corresponding. The only question now is whether we suit each other well enough to make a good marriage. How do we determine that? Helena asked. We spend time together. We talk. We see if we can build something together. He hesitated. I should tell you I am not a romantic man. I am not going to write you poetry or bring you flowers every day. But I will work hard to provide for you. I will be faithful to you. I will treat you with respect and kindness. That is what I can promise. Helena thought about her parents' marriage, which had been arranged by their families. They had been cordial to each other, even affectionate at times, but she had never seen any great passion between them. What James offered seemed, in its way, more honest than romantic fantasies. I can promise you the same, she said. Faithfulness, respect, and hard work. I will do my best to be a good wife to you. James smiled. Then perhaps we have a foundation to build on. They spent the next hour talking, discussing practical matters like what household items she had brought, what would be needed for the cabin, when they might marry if they decided to proceed. James explained that the ranch kept him busy 6 days a week, but he could come to town on Sundays after church. They could spend time together, get to know each other better, and make their decision. How long would you like? James asked. Before we decide definitely, Helena considered. A month. That would give us 4 Sundays together. A month, James agreed. He stood and she rose as well. May I write to you during the week? I know we have been corresponding, but now that you are here, I thought you might prefer to focus on settling in. I would like you to write, Helena said honestly. Your letters were what made me feel I might know you well enough to come here. He smiled again, that warm expression that transformed his face. Then I will write. As he prepared to leave, Helena walked with him to the door. On impulse, she offered her hand and he took it carefully in his own. Thank you, she said softly, for understanding, for giving me a choice. His hand tightened gently around hers. Thank you for being brave enough to come here. After he left, Mrs. Foster appeared from the kitchen with a satisfied expression. Well, we are going to spend a month getting to know each other before we decide, Helena reported. He will call on Sundays. A sensible plan, Mrs. Foster approved. Though I suspect you have both already decided and just do not want to seem hasty. She smiled at Helena's expression. I have lived a long time, my dear. I know the look of two people who have found something they were not quite expecting. Over the following weeks, a pattern developed. James came to town every Sunday after church, which Helena began attending with Mrs. Foster. The first Sunday, she was nervous about the attention her limp would draw, but the congregation was welcoming. She met the minister, Reverend Samuel Harris, and his wife, who invited her to join the ladies' sewing circle. After church, James would come to the boarding house and they would spend the afternoon together. Sometimes they sat in the parlor and talked. Other times, when the weather was fine, they walked slowly through town or sat on the bench outside the boarding house. James always matched his pace to hers without making her feel rushed or inadequate. They talked about everything during those Sundays. He told her about his work, about the challenges of managing cattle, about his plans for his own ranch. She told him about her life in Philadelphia, about the pain of losing her mother young, about her father's descent into debt after some bad business investments. She told him about the isolation she had felt, especially after her father's death, when she had been truly alone for the first time. I used to watch other women walking easily down the street, running to catch an omnibus, dancing at parties, she confessed one Sunday. And I would feel such envy, such anger at the unfairness of it. Do you still feel that way? James asked. Helena thought about it. Sometimes, but less than I used to. I think I have learned that everyone has something they wish they could change about themselves or their circumstances. My difference is simply more visible than most. During the weeks between Sundays, James wrote to her as promised. His letters were not flowery or poetic, but they were thoughtful and genuine. He wrote about his days, about the horses he worked with, about the progress on his cabin. He asked her questions about what she was learning about Mineral Point, about her week with Mrs. Foster. Helena found herself looking forward to his letters with an eagerness that surprised her. She wrote back, telling him about the sewing circle where she had impressed the ladies with her fine needlework, about helping Mrs. Foster with her garden, about the books she was borrowing from the small-town library. As the month progressed, Helena felt herself relaxing into life in Mineral Point. The town was different from Philadelphia in countless ways, smaller and rougher around the edges, but there was a warmth here she had not expected. People greeted her on the street, asked how she was settling in, included her in conversations. Mrs. Foster's boarding house felt more like a home than anywhere she had lived since her mother died. And there was James. Each Sunday, she found herself more drawn to him, more certain that this quiet, steady man was someone she could build a life with. He made her laugh with dry observations about ranch life. He listened when she talked, really listened, asking questions that showed he cared about her thoughts and feelings. He never made her feel less than whole because of her leg. The fourth Sunday of her time in Mineral Point, James arrived looking more nervous than she had seen him. They walked to the edge of town, to a small park where there was a bench overlooking the valley below. The October air was crisp, the leaves turning brilliant shades of red and gold. "Our month is nearly up," James said after they had sat in companionable silence for a few minutes. "I suppose we need to make a decision." Helena's heart was pounding, but she felt calm. "I suppose we do." James turned to face her. "I have come to care for you, Helena. These past weeks, getting to know you, have been the best I have had in longer than I can remember. You are kind, you are hardworking, you are brave. You make me laugh. You listen when I talk about things most people find boring. When I think about my future, about my cabin and my land, I cannot imagine it without you there." Helena felt warmth spread through her chest. "I care for you too. You have shown me more respect and kindness than anyone has in years. You make me feel valued, not despite my limitations, but as I am. When you talk about your dreams, your land, your plans, I want to be part of that. I want to help you build something." "Then you will marry me?" James asked, and there was hope and vulnerability in his voice that touched her deeply. "Yes," Helena said, feeling certainty settle over her like a warm cloak. "Yes, I will marry you." James reached out and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. "I will do my best to make you happy, Helena. I promise you that. And I will do the same for you," she replied. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. It was chaste and respectful, but Helena felt it all the way to her toes. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church, with Mrs. Foster and several of the townspeople in attendance. Helena wore a simple dress of cream-colored muslin that she had sewn herself with Mrs. Foster's help. James wore his best suit, which had belonged to his father and which Mrs. Foster had altered to fit him properly. Reverend Harris performed the ceremony, speaking about the sanctity of marriage, about partnership and commitment. When it came time for the vows, James's voice was steady and sure. "I, James Norton, take you, Helena Wright, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, honor you, and care for you in sickness and in health, in good times and in bad, for as long as we both shall live." Helena's voice trembled slightly, but she spoke clearly. "I, Helena Wright, take you, James Norton, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, honor you, and care for you in sickness and in health, in good times and in bad, for as long as we both shall live." When Reverend Harris pronounced them man and wife, James kissed her properly for the first time, his lips warm and gentle against hers. Helena felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they were tears of happiness, of relief, of hope for the future. After the ceremony, Mrs. Foster hosted a small reception at the boarding house. There was cake and coffee, and the townspeople who attended were genuinely warm in their congratulations. Mr. Chen gave them a set of beautiful porcelain dishes as a wedding gift. The women from the sewing circle had made them a quilt. Mrs. Foster gave Helena a rolling pin that had belonged to her mother. As the afternoon wore on, Helena realized with a mix of nervousness and anticipation that soon she and James would leave for his cabin, for the home that was now hers as well. They would spend their first night as husband and wife, and she had only the vaguest idea of what that might entail. As if sensing her nervousness, James touched her elbow gently. "Are you ready? It is about an hour's ride to the cabin. I borrowed a wagon so you would not have to ride horseback, and I have made it as comfortable as I could." Helena nodded, gathering her courage. She said goodbye to Mrs. Foster, who hugged her tightly and whispered, "Be patient with each other. That is the secret to a good marriage." James helped her into the wagon, where he had indeed arranged blankets to cushion the seat. Her few belongings were loaded in the back, along with the wedding gifts. He climbed up beside her, took up the reins, and they set off. The road out of Mineral Point was well traveled at first, but soon they turned onto a smaller track that led west. The countryside was beautiful, rolling hills covered in autumn colors, with occasional farmhouses and barns dotting the landscape. James pointed out landmarks as they rode, naming the neighboring ranches and farms. "That is the Triple Creek Ranch," he said, gesturing toward a large spread of land with several buildings. "Where I have been working. The owner, Mr. Douglas, is a fair man. He gave me time off for the wedding and the rest of this week to help you settle in." "That was generous of him," Helena said. "He is pleased I married," James replied. "He said a married man is more stable, more committed. He has already said that when I am ready to work my own land full-time, he will give me a recommendation and help me get started with loans if I need them." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the afternoon sun warm on their faces. Helena tried not to think too much about the approaching night, about her nervousness regarding marital intimacy. She had received only the vaguest instruction from Mrs. Foster, who had assured her that James seemed like a considerate man and would be patient. "There," James said suddenly, pride evident in his voice. "That is our land." Helena looked where he was pointing and caught her breath. The land rose gently before them, covered in grass that had turned golden in the autumn light. A creek wound through the property, glinting in the sun. And on a small rise overlooking it all sat a cabin, simple but solidly built with a stone chimney and real glass windows. "James," she breathed. "It is beautiful." His face lit up at her reaction. "You really think so?" "I do. It is exactly what you described in your letters, only better." He guided the wagon up the track toward the cabin, and as they drew closer, Helena could see the care he had taken with its construction. The logs were neatly fitted, the roof was sound, and there was a small covered porch across the front. Flower boxes sat beneath the windows, empty now but waiting for spring planting. James brought the wagon to a stop in front of the cabin and jumped down, then came around to help Helena descend. As her feet touched the ground, he suddenly swept her into his arms, making her gasp in surprise. "James, what are you doing, carrying my bride over the threshold?" he said with a grin. "It is tradition, is it not?" Helena laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck. "I think I am supposed to be able to walk across it myself for it to count." "New tradition, then," he declared, carrying her up the steps and across the porch. "I carry you over the threshold so the house knows from the start that you belong here, that you are precious and should be treated accordingly." He pushed open the door and carried her inside, setting her down carefully in the middle of the main room. Helena looked around with wonder. It was a simple space, but James had clearly worked to make it comfortable. There was a stone fireplace with a fire already laid, ready to be lit. A sturdy table with 2 chairs sat near the kitchen area, where there was a cast iron stove, shelves for dishes, and a dry sink. A rocking chair sat near the fireplace, with a small bookshelf beside it. "The bedroom is through there," James said, gesturing to a door. "And the loft is for storage right now, but eventually I thought it could be a room for children." He paused, looking suddenly shy. "If we are blessed with them." Helena felt heat rise to her cheeks at the mention of children, but she managed to meet his eyes. "You have made a wonderful home, James." He looked relieved. "I am glad you think so. I know it is not much compared to what you are probably used to." "It is better," Helena said honestly, "because it is ours." Over the next few hours, James brought in their belongings and Helena began to arrange things, making the cabin feel like home. She unpacked her few dishes and combined them with James's simple collection. She put the beautiful porcelain set from Mr. Chen on display on the shelf. She hung the quilt from the sewing circle on the wall in the bedroom, where the brass bed James had purchased stood with crisp white sheets and a warm woolen blanket. James lit the fire as the sun began to set, and Helena prepared their first meal together in their home. It was simple, just bacon and eggs with bread and coffee, but they ate it at their own table in their own home, and it felt like a feast. After supper, James washed the dishes while Helena dried them and put them away, working together in comfortable synchronization. When the kitchen was clean, they sat together in front of the fire, Helena in the rocking chair and James on a cushion on the floor beside her. "Are you happy?" James asked quietly. Helena thought about the question seriously. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, about the fear and uncertainty she had felt boarding that stagecoach in Philadelphia. She thought about meeting James, about his kindness and respect, about the life they were beginning together. "Yes," she said with certainty. "I am happy. Are you?" James reached up and took her hand. "More than I thought I could be." As the fire burned down, the nervousness Helena had been trying to ignore all day returned. She knew what came next, what was expected on a wedding night, but the reality of it suddenly seemed overwhelming. "Helena," James said gently, as if sensing her tension, "we do not have to rush anything. This is our home, our life. We have time." She looked down at him, at his honest face in the firelight. "But surely you expect—" "I expect that we will learn together," James said, "that we will be patient with each other. I want you to be comfortable with me, not frightened." He stood and offered his hand. "Come to bed. Let me hold you, and that will be enough for tonight." His gentleness, his understanding, made Helena's eyes fill with tears. She took his hand and let him lead her to the bedroom. With her back turned for modesty, she changed into her nightgown while James changed into his nightshirt. When she turned around, he was already in bed, holding the blankets up for her. She climbed in carefully, her legs stiff after the long day. James arranged the pillows to help support it, then lay back down, leaving space between them. "May I hold you?" he asked quietly. Helena nodded, not trusting her voice. He moved closer, wrapping his arm around her waist and drawing her back against his chest. She could feel the warmth of him, the solid strength of his body, and slowly she began to relax. "This is nice," she whispered. "Yes," James agreed, his breath warm against her hair. "This is very nice." They lay like that for a long time, not speaking, just being close. Helena felt safe in a way she had not felt in years, perhaps ever. Here, in the arms of this man she had known for such a short time, she felt like she had come home. "James," she said softly. "Yes, thank you for being patient with me, for understanding." His arm tightened around her slightly. "We have our whole lives, Helena. There is no rush for anything." She fell asleep that way, wrapped in warmth and safety, and did not dream. The next few weeks passed in a blur of learning and adjusting. Helena learned the rhythms of the cabin, of ranch life, of being a wife. James worked long days at the Triple Creek Ranch, leaving before dawn and returning at dusk. Helena spent her days tending the cabin, learning to cook on the cast iron stove, which was different from the one she had used in Philadelphia. She mended James's clothes, which had been neglected for too long, and made curtains for the windows from fabric she had brought with her. Each evening, James would return tired and hungry, and Helena would have a meal waiting. They would eat together, talking about their days, and then they would sit by the fire or, as winter approached, would go to bed early to conserve firewood. Slowly, carefully, with patience and gentleness, they learned each other in the intimate way of husband and wife. James was as considerate in the marriage bed as he was in everything else, always mindful of her comfort, always patient with her nervousness. Helena discovered that physical intimacy, which she had feared might be unpleasant or painful, could be tender and even sweet with the right person. She learned the landscape of her husband's body, the scars from his work, the strength in his arms, the gentleness of his hands. Winter came to Wisconsin with a vengeance that year. Snow fell heavy and deep, and the temperature dropped until the creek froze solid. James showed Helena how to bank the fire to last through the night, how to layer clothing to stay warm, how to store food to last through the long, cold months. On Sundays, when the weather permitted, they would hitch up the wagon and drive into Mineral Point for church and to visit with Mrs. Foster and the other townspeople. Helena discovered she was stronger than she had thought. The work of maintaining the cabin was hard, especially when she had to break ice in the water barrel or trudge through snow to the necessary, but she found satisfaction in it. This was her home, her life, and she was building it with her own hands. On one particularly cold January evening, after James had returned from work and they had eaten supper, Helena gathered her courage and told him something she had been wanting to say for weeks. "James, I have been thinking. When spring comes, I would like to start a garden, a proper one with vegetables and herbs, and I thought perhaps some chickens for eggs." James looked up from the harness he was mending, his face brightening. "That is an excellent idea. We can fence an area behind the cabin for the garden and I can build a chicken coop. Why did you not mention this sooner?" Helena felt her cheeks warm. "I did not want to presume. This is your home, your land. I thought perhaps you had different plans." James set down the harness and came to where she sat in the rocking chair. He knelt beside her, taking her hands in his. "Helena, this is our home, our land. Your ideas are just as important as mine, more so since you are the one here all day. I want you to make this place yours, to do whatever will make you happy and comfortable." "I am already happy," Helena said softly, "but I would like to contribute more, to produce things we need rather than having to buy everything." "Then we will do exactly that," James said firmly. "In the spring, we will start a proper garden and get chickens, and anything else you think we need." Helena leaned forward and kissed him, still sometimes surprised by the affection between them. What had started as a practical arrangement had grown into something deeper, something real. She did not know if it was love yet, but it was certainly the beginning of love, the foundation upon which love could be built. As winter slowly gave way to early spring, Helena began to feel unwell in the mornings. At first she thought it might be something she had eaten, but as the weeks passed and the nausea continued, accompanied by a bone-deep fatigue, she began to suspect the truth. She waited until she was certain, until there could be no doubt, before telling James. One Sunday evening, as they sat together after supper, she reached across the table and took his hand. "James, I have something to tell you." He looked up, concerned by the seriousness of her tone. "What is it? Are you unwell?" "In a manner of speaking," Helena said, unable to keep the smile from her face. "I believe I am with child." James stared at her, his expression cycling through surprise, disbelief, and then pure joy. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be. Mrs. Foster confirmed it when I spoke with her last Sunday." James stood so quickly he nearly knocked over his chair, then came around the table and knelt beside her, his hands gentle on her belly. "A baby. We are going to have a baby. Are you pleased?" Helena asked, though she could see the answer in his face. "Pleased?" James laughed, a sound of pure happiness. "Helena, I am more than pleased. I am overjoyed. This is everything I hoped for when I built this cabin, when I placed that advertisement. A wife, a home, and now a child. It is more than I dreamed possible." He pulled her into his arms, careful of her belly, and held her close. Helena felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they were happy tears. She thought about the woman she had been 6 months ago, alone and frightened in Philadelphia, certain she would spend her life alone. Now she had a husband who valued her, a home she was making her own, and a child growing inside her. "I am frightened," she admitted quietly. "What if something goes wrong? What if I cannot manage with my leg?" James pulled back to look at her. "You are the strongest person I know. You traveled across the country alone to start a new life. You adapted to a place and a life completely different from everything you knew. You have made this cabin into a home. You will be a wonderful mother, Helena, and I will be here to help you every step of the way." His confidence in her, his unwavering belief, steadied Helena's fears. "We will do this together," she said. "Together," James agreed. "Always together." As spring bloomed across the Wisconsin landscape, James kept his word about the garden and the chickens. He fenced a large area behind the cabin and spent his Sundays turning the soil, breaking up the packed earth and mixing in compost. Helena, under strict orders not to overexert herself given her condition, directed operations from a chair James had placed in the shade. "A little more to the left," she called as he staked out the rows. "The tomatoes will need the most sun." James adjusted the stakes obligingly. "You are enjoying this far too much." "I am enjoying watching my husband work without having to do it myself," Helena teased. "It is a novel experience." The chicken coop took another few Sundays to build, but by May, they had 6 hens and a rooster, all purchased from a neighboring farm. Helena delighted in collecting the warm eggs each morning, in scattering feed and watching the chickens peck around their enclosure. As her pregnancy progressed, her belly growing round and her movements becoming more awkward, James became increasingly protective. He did not want her walking to the creek to fetch water, did not want her carrying anything heavy, barely wanted her cooking for fear she would tire herself. "James, I am going to have a baby, not expire from a deadly illness," Helena said with exasperation one evening when he tried to take a pan of biscuits from her hands. "I need to be able to move and work or I shall go mad." "I just worry," James said, "about you, about the baby." Helena softened at the genuine concern in his voice. She set down the pan and went to him, taking his hands in hers. "I know you do, but you must trust me to know my own limits. If I need help, I will ask for it. But I need to feel useful, to feel like I am contributing." "You are growing our child," James said, placing his hand on her belly where the baby was starting to kick regularly. "That is contribution enough." But he did ease up, allowing her more freedom while still keeping a watchful eye. Together, they worked in the garden in the evenings, weeding and watering the growing plants. Helena found joy in watching things grow, in seeing the tangible results of their labor. The lettuce and radishes came first, then peas climbing their trellis, then beans and tomatoes and squash. In July, as the summer heat baked the Wisconsin earth, Helena went into labor. James had been working at the Triple Creek Ranch when Mrs. Foster, who had come to spend the day with Helena as she did once a week now, sent one of the ranch hands to fetch him with the message that the baby was coming. James rode home faster than he ever had, arriving to find Mrs. Foster calmly boiling water and preparing cloths while Helena labored in the bedroom. He rushed to her side, taking her hand. "I am here," he said. "I am right here." Helena, between contractions, managed a weak smile. "You are supposed to wait outside. Men do not attend births." "I am not leaving you," James said firmly. "Mrs. Foster, I am staying." Mrs. Foster raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Very well, but you do as I say and stay out of the way unless I need you." The labor was long and difficult. Helena's leg, which had caused her challenges her whole life, made the positions for labor difficult to maintain. But James stayed beside her the entire time, holding her hand, supporting her back, whispering encouragement and love into her ear. Finally, as the sun was setting, painting the cabin in golden light, the baby arrived. A boy, strong and healthy, with a powerful set of lungs that he used immediately. A son, Mrs. Foster announced, wrapping the baby in a clean cloth and placing him in Helena's arms. A fine, healthy son. Helena looked down at the tiny, red-faced creature in her arms and felt her heart expand in a way she had not known was possible. This was her child, hers and James's, a life they had created together. "He is perfect," she whispered. James, tears running unashamedly down his face, reached out to touch the baby's tiny hand. What should we name him? They had discussed names over the past months but had not decided firmly. Now, looking at her son, Helena knew. "Jacob," she said. "Jacob Norton." "Jacob," James repeated, trying out the name. "I like it. Jacob Norton." He looked at Helena, his eyes full of love and wonder. "Thank you for him, for everything. You have given me more happiness than I knew existed." After Mrs. Foster had tended to both Helena and the baby, after she had made sure everyone was comfortable and resting, she prepared to leave. "I will come back tomorrow to check on you," she said. "But for now, you three need time alone together as a family." A family. Helena thought about that word as she lay in bed, baby Jacob nursing contentedly at her breast, James sitting beside her with his hand on her shoulder. A family. She had one again, after being alone for so long. The first months of Jacob's life were exhausting but joyful. He was a hungry baby, waking often in the night, and Helena was constantly tired. But when she held him, when she saw James's face as he looked at their son, all the exhaustion seemed worthwhile. James proved to be a devoted father, taking over the baby's care whenever he was home, changing nappies without complaint, walking the floor with Jacob when he was fussy, singing old songs his own mother had sung to him. As autumn arrived again, marking a full year since Helena had arrived in Mineral Point, she stood in the doorway of the cabin one morning, watching James work with the cattle he had brought onto their land. Jacob was asleep in the cradle James had built, and the morning chores were done. The garden had produced bountifully, and they had shelves full of preserved vegetables for the winter. The chickens were laying well. The cabin was warm and comfortable. Helena thought about the journey that had brought her here, about stepping off that stagecoach with her carpetbag and her secrets, terrified of rejection. She thought about James's first words to her, about the promise he had made. "I'll walk slow beside you always." He had kept that promise. Not just in the literal sense, matching his pace to hers on their walks, but in every aspect of their life together. He had been patient with her fears, gentle with her insecurities, supportive of her efforts. He had shown her what partnership truly meant. And in return, she had given him everything she had. She had made his cabin a home, had worked alongside him to build their life, had given him a son and would, God willing, give him more children in time. She had learned to love him, deeply and truly, not in a sudden flash of romantic passion but in the steady, growing way of day-to-day life shared. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to find James approaching, his work done for the moment. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "About how far we have come," Helena said. "About how different my life is from what I expected a year ago." "Better or worse?" James asked, though there was a teasing note in his voice that suggested he knew the answer. "Better," Helena said firmly. "So much better than I ever imagined." She turned in his arms to face him. "I love you, James Norton. I do not think I have said it enough, but I do. I love you for your kindness, your patience, your steadiness. I love you for seeing past my limp to the person I am inside. I love you for giving me a home and a family and a life I am proud of." James's eyes were suspiciously bright. "I love you too, Helena Norton. I loved you before I met you from your letters." I loved you when you stepped off that stagecoach and looked at me with such fear and hope in your eyes. I have loved you every day since, watching you bloom here, watching you become the woman I always knew you could be." He kissed her then, a deep, loving kiss that spoke of commitment and partnership and the life they were building together. From inside the cabin, Jacob began to cry, demanding attention as babies do. They broke apart, laughing, and went together to tend to their son. The years that followed were not always easy. There were hard winters when money was tight and the cold seemed to seep into your very bones. There were dry summers when the garden struggled and the cattle grew thin. There were illnesses and injuries, setbacks and disappointments. But through it all, James and Helena faced everything together. James eventually left the Triple Creek Ranch to work their own land full-time, building their herds slowly and carefully. Helena's garden became renowned in the area, and she began selling her preserved vegetables in town, adding to their income. 2 years after Jacob was born, Helena delivered twin girls, Emma and Grace, who inherited their father's dark hair and their mother's blue eyes. 3 years after that came another son, Samuel, who was the image of James. The cabin grew as well. James added another bedroom, then a proper parlor, then a covered porch that wrapped around 2 sides of the house. The ranch prospered, not making them wealthy but providing a solid, comfortable living. Helena's leg remained a challenge, and as she aged, it sometimes pained her more, especially in cold weather. But it no longer defined her. She was known in Mineral Point not as the woman with the limp, but as Helena Norton, wife of James, mother of 4, with the best vegetable garden in the county, and a way of making even the most stubborn seedling grow. On their 10th anniversary, James took Helena into town for a rare dinner at the hotel. Mrs. Foster, now elderly but still sharp-eyed, watched the children for the evening. Over roast beef and potatoes, James reached across the table and took Helena's hand. "You remember when you first arrived?" he asked. "How frightened you were." "How frightened we both were," Helena corrected with a smile. "You were terrified I would get back on that stagecoach and leave." "I was," James admitted. "I could not believe someone like you would choose someone like me, a rough cowboy with nothing but dreams and a half-built cabin." "Those dreams became reality," Helena said, squeezing his hand. "You made them real through hard work and determination. And you let me be part of it, made me feel like I was contributing, like I mattered." "You did more than contribute," James said seriously. "You made it all worthwhile. Every day, watching you with the children, seeing the home you have made, the life we have built together, I thank God you answered that advertisement." "So do I," Helena said softly. "Every single day." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the sounds of the dining room around them, the clink of silverware and the murmur of conversation. "I have been thinking," James said finally. "Jacob is getting old enough to start learning ranch work properly. And the girls will need schooling beyond what you can teach them at home. Samuel, too, in a few years." "What are you proposing?" Helena asked. "There is talk of building a proper school in Mineral Point, hiring a real teacher. I thought perhaps we could help with that, donate some money or materials, give our children and others a better education than either of us had." Helena felt pride swell in her chest. "That is a wonderful idea. We can afford it." "We can afford some," James said, "and I think it is important. Our children should have opportunities, choices. They should be able to decide their own paths." "You are a good man, James Norton," Helena said, her eyes misting. "The best of men." "I am a man who knows he was given a gift the day you arrived," James replied. "And I try every day to be worthy of it." As the years continued to pass, the Norton family became a fixture in Mineral Point. Jacob grew into a serious young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. The twins, Emma and Grace, were bright and lively. Emma interested in books and learning, Grace fascinated by animals and the natural world. Samuel was the adventurous one, always exploring, always getting into mischief. Helena taught them all to be kind, to judge people by their character rather than their circumstances, to work hard and value what they had. James taught them about the land, about cattle and horses, about integrity and keeping your word. The children, of course, knew about their mother's limp. They had grown up watching her move more slowly, seeing her sit down to rest more often than other mothers might. But they never saw it as a weakness, because their parents never treated it as one. It was simply a part of who Helena was, like her blue eyes or her skill with plants. One day, when Emma was 8 years old, she came home from town upset. Helena found her crying in her room. "Emma, darling, what is wrong?" "Molly Peterson said mean things about you," Emma sobbed. "She said you walk funny, and that her mother said you should not have children because they might be crippled too." Helena felt a flash of old pain, the remembered sting of cruel words and judgments, but she pushed it aside and sat down beside her daughter, pulling her close. "Molly Peterson is unkind," Helena said gently, "and her mother is ignorant. People sometimes say hurtful things about what they do not understand." "But it made me so angry," Emma said. "I wanted to hit her." "I know," Helena said, "but violence is not the answer. The best response to ignorance is to live your life well, to show by example that their judgments are wrong." "Does it still hurt your feelings?" Emma asked. "When people say things," Helena considered the question. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but less than it used to. I know who I am, Emma. I know what I have accomplished, the family I have helped build, the life I have made. What small-minded people think matters much less when you know your own worth." Emma hugged her tightly. "I think you are the best mother in the whole world." "And I think you are the best daughter," Helena replied, kissing the top of her head. "Do not let others' unkindness make you unkind. That is the real tragedy." When Helena was 45 years old, her health began to decline. The leg that had troubled her since childhood began to cause more serious problems. An infection settled in, brought on by a small wound that would not heal. The doctor from Mineral Point came out to the ranch, examined her, and took James aside with a grave expression. "The infection is serious," he said quietly. "I have given her medicine, but at her age, with the complications from her leg, it could be dangerous." James felt fear grip his heart. "What can I do?" "Keep her resting, keep the wound clean, pray," the doctor said. "That is all any of us can do." For 2 weeks, Helena lay in bed while the infection raged through her body. James barely left her side, sitting beside the bed, holding her hand, talking to her even when she was too feverish to respond coherently. The children came in one by one to sit with their mother, their faces scared. Helena drifted in and out of consciousness, lost in fever dreams. But one afternoon, as the fever finally broke, she opened her eyes to find James sitting beside her, looking haggard and worn. "James," she whispered, her throat dry. He leaned forward immediately, his face flooding with relief. "Helena, oh thank God, I thought. I am still here," she said softly. He helped her drink some water, then settled back, still holding her hand. "You scared me," he said, his voice rough. "I could not bear the thought of losing you." "I am not ready to leave yet," Helena replied. "We still have years ahead of us, James Norton. I intend to see all our children grown and settled before I go anywhere." And she kept that promise. She recovered from the infection, though it left her weaker, her leg more troublesome than before. But she adapted, as she always had, finding ways to manage, to continue contributing, to remain an active part of the family and the ranch. Jacob, at 25, fell in love with a girl from a neighboring ranch, a strong-willed young woman named Alice who could ride and rope as well as any man. They married and built a house on a portion of the Norton land, starting their own herd with help from James. Emma, true to her love of learning, became a teacher in the new Mineral Point School, inspiring children just as her mother had inspired her. Grace married a veterinarian who moved to Mineral Point specifically to serve the farming community, and together they built a practice and a life. Samuel was the last to settle, spending several years exploring the Western Territories before returning home to realize that everything he wanted was right there in Wisconsin. He took over the day-to-day running of the ranch, allowing James to finally slow down. On a warm spring evening, when Helena was 58 years old, she and James sat on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over the land they had built together. Her leg pained her considerably these days, and she moved with a cane that James had carved for her, decorating it with flowers and vines. "You ever regret it?" James asked suddenly. "Answering that advertisement, coming here." Helena turned to look at her husband, at the man who had been her partner for 35 years. His hair was gray now, his face lined, but his eyes still held the same kindness and steadiness that had drawn her to him. "Not for a single moment," she said firmly. "This life, this family, it is all more than I ever dreamed possible when I stepped off that stagecoach. I told you I would walk slow beside you always," James said, reaching over to take her hand. "I meant it." "And you kept your promise," Helena said, squeezing his hand. "In every way that matters." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn pink and orange and purple as the sun disappeared below the horizon. From inside the house, they could hear the sounds of Samuel and his wife preparing dinner, the laughter of their grandchildren playing in the yard. "We built something good," James said quietly. "We did," Helena agreed. "Together." Helena lived to be 67 years old. She passed away peacefully in her sleep one winter night with James holding her hand just as he had held it on their first night together in the cabin all those years ago. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half of Mineral Point, all coming to pay their respects to a woman who had become a cornerstone of the community. Jacob spoke at the funeral, talking about his mother's strength and kindness. Emma read a poem she had written. Grace and Samuel both shared memories that made people laugh and cry in equal measure. But it was James who had the last word. Standing beside his wife's casket, his voice steady despite his grief, he spoke simply. "Helena came to Mineral Point as a stranger, answering an advertisement from a man she did not know, taking a chance on a life she could not predict. She was brave and strong and kind, and she made me better than I ever would have been without her. She taught our children to judge people by their character, to work hard, to value what matters. She made our house a home, our land a ranch, our family something I am proud of. I promised her when we met that I would walk slow beside her always, and I kept that promise. Now she has gone ahead, and I will walk slow and steady until I catch up to her again." James lived another 5 years after Helena passed, long enough to see his grandchildren grown, to see the ranch continue to prosper under Samuel's capable management, to know that everything he and Helena had built together would continue. When he died, peacefully in his chair by the fire one evening with a book in his lap, the family buried him beside Helena in the Mineral Point Cemetery. On the shared headstone, Jacob had carved the words his father had spoken the day their mother arrived. "I'll walk slow beside you always." The Norton Ranch continued for generations, passed down through the family, growing and changing with the times but never losing the foundation that James and Helena had built. Their story became part of the family lore, told to each new generation. The story of the mail-order bride who arrived with a limp, and the cowboy who promised to walk slow beside her always. And in Mineral Point, Wisconsin, where the town had grown from a rough mining settlement to a prosperous community, people still remembered Helena and James Norton. They remembered a marriage that had started as a practical arrangement and had grown into a love story, proof that the best foundations are built not on passion alone, but on respect, kindness, patience, and commitment. The cabin where they had started their life together still stood on the land, preserved by the family as a reminder of where they had come from. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, people swore they could see two figures on the porch, sitting close together, watching the sunset over the Wisconsin hills, walking slow beside each other into eternity.